Hey everyone, I'm Jay-Z. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Linktree. Maybe given the topic, I will start with doing a little bit of an intro in terms of how I got into product. So I graduated with an econ degree. Of course, the thing you did was essentially it was iBanking or consulting. I picked consulting. And I realized I just really wanted to be actually building and sitting on the side of the table that was truly making decisions as opposed to handing off those decisions to someone else. And so that's essentially how I got into product, with that deep desire, also with a deep desire to move from, I was working in Boston, moved to SF. And so I started my career in gaming. And so I think there's a lot that as a, that you can think about in terms of the opportunities. When I joined as a PM in gaming, I really leveraged the skill set that I had, which was data analysis. Again, I was an econ major. I thought I would never have to use microecon when you take microecon in college. And then here I was balancing a game economy. And so I think it's one of those things where on this topic of like, how do you think about your career? How do you think about where the future is going in terms of what's even open in terms of roles? Really thinking about what is your superpower? Where's the world going? And how do you kind of find kind of like the mix between the two? So anyways, we can do more of an intro later in the Q&A in terms of like my actual career path, all the places I've worked at. But I just thought that was most interesting from for this group. So today I actually wanted to go into a topic that I think is really interesting, which is, in the world of AI, in the world, not just AI, in a world where the macroeconomic environment is what it is today, the way hiring is going, the way layoffs are going, what is the role of product management managers? And what I really see in today's world is one where when budgets are really tight, when you're looking at headcount and you're thinking, how can I do more with less? I'm actually seeing a really rapid evolution of the manager role. I would say that in previous years, in the past decade of hypergrowth of a very different economic environment, you actually just see very traditional ratios. You'd be like, hey, I have these 3 PMs, and these 3 PMs, like there's a lot of them. There's a lot just in terms of managing their scope. And so I would go ahead and hire a group PM here, right? And so you actually see titles from, you get to product lead, to group PM, to, you get senior manager, you get all these different titles over time. And I'm actually seeing a pretty rapid shift away for a couple of reasons. I think this idea of, with all the tools out there, Paulo mentioned a few things, like you have Notion, you have Google Docs, you have, kind of AI embedded in Notion. You have the ability to go on, ChatGPT and say, write me your PRD, like here are my inputs, right? The work that previously people were doing in terms of really like writing things down, creating the one pager, that is happening at a pace that is much faster than it was previously possible before. So again, you could do 10 specs in the time of, that it took you to write one. And I think the other thing that you really see happening is just the pace of change with design tools. You see a world where a lot of people are like, hey, my spec is either non-existent or very, very lightweight. And I'm doing a lot of my, figuring out what it is we're building, why it is we're building the thing in tools like a Figma, where you, again, if you actually even listen to some PMs who recently shared their best practices, they're not like, this is my 10-page spec. They share practices in a way where it's like, here's my Figma file, and I make comments around them, right? So I see a world where, because of the way that writing is evolving, because of the way design tools are evolving, and then it's no longer this like handoff thing where it's like there's just a lot of work in between each piece of the process of building product. You can actually truncate the amount of time that PMs were previously doing work, into a much smaller amount of time. And so I really see this as, and I will screen share, give me 1 second. I really see this as a time where, PM managers, their role is rapidly evolving. And I see the rise of, what I think a lot of people are calling the Super IC, because of the tools that are out there. And so, again, I'm going to go through this content really quickly because I really think the most interesting piece is actually the Q&A. But what I really see is a lot of the this concept of player coach happening a lot, where before you're like, I'm just the coach. I am the person sitting, if you were a director, you're sitting across a whole area, you're coaching all the PMs. Now you're like, hey, I previously could hire 7 PMs in this area. Today I can hire 3. So first of all, there's a headcount shift. And now I also, given the fact that there's only 4 of us as opposed to 7 plus 1, 8 of us, right? Like double, what you're expected to do as a manager is that player coach, where you are working really closely, you're coaching the 3 people that you have. And at the same time, you're getting your hands dirty, you're actually writing the specs, you're actually moving things forward. So I see that happening a lot. And as a result, you see things like career ladders collapsing. Meaning, you used to have 2 very clear, this is a people management track and this is an IC track. And I do actually see a lot of companies having one track where it's just like, okay, this is an extension. You're still playing, you're still doing a lot of IC work, but at this point in time, you're able to, manage a few people. And I'm also seeing those numbers go down. Before it'd be like, it's really odd to have, 1 manager over 2 people. And today it's like, it's actually okay, not because we have a bunch of managers, but because we have fewer managers, they're managing fewer people. But because of the tool set that we have, because of the way we're working, that's fine. We don't need double the headcount. So going and talking a little bit about the Super IC, I see, I see a world where, given the tools that we have, whether it's in writing the spec, which is really the beginning of the process when you're really in this problem space, to actually developing the solution, which is when you're using tools like design tools, prototyping tools, all the way to actually like launching and using tools to measure, given the proliferation of tools across that entire stack, right? So again, just like going down the space today. So in the past, you used to have to spend hours sitting down with a sales team and be like, what are you hearing? Okay, let me categorize those things. You have to sit with customer support and get like a CSV dump of all the things and recategorize them. You'd have to go out there and like spend time interviewing people, which takes a lot of time even to like get that scheduled and like synthesizing those insights. You see tools, I'll just use one for example, like a sauce, where it's like, I'm integrated into Gong, I'm integrated into your customer support queue, I'm integrated into intercom, integrated all these things, and I'm just going to automatically synthesize and pull and then give you top trends, right? Things that would have taken a PM legitimately probably 30 hours to do, you have tools out there that are doing that for you. And I see this also for a few other roles where, for example, the role of research. In the past, it was like, I need a researcher per squad or per team. Now you're like, do I really, or do I actually use tools like Dovetail and Sprig and user testing? I can do a lot just through watching people use my thing. I can do a lot with the thing embedded into my product. Do I actually need to have a dedicated researcher, or can the PM or can the designer take on a lot of that work? So this idea of that super IC, where again, before something would take you literally 40 hours, can now take you 4. That's definitely happening across the industry for a variety of roles, right? So that's a problem space. And then when you move into the solution space, you're getting to a world where, again, you're no longer just like, hey, I'm going to hand this off to a designer. You can do a lot of the design yourself. We have the proliferation of design systems, right? Like a lot of what Figma is investing in is giving you those design systems. So like you can lower the bar or the barrier to entry for producing designs in a given organization. You have tools like Webflow, where again, you lower the bar. You're like, any marketer can be a designer. It doesn't have to be just a brand designer. When it doesn't even just have to be a front engineer, it could be the designer doing the front end engineering. So you see a lot of these tools in like this no code space, really lowering that barrier. And so everyone is able to do more. So that kind of blends into the solution space as well as the actual build process. And then finally with, products where you're kind of closing that loop, you're able to have the analytics, again, with a world of mixed panel, a world of amplitude, you're seeing so much of that stuff. So you're seeing collapsing of those roles. Do you need a dedicated product analyst anymore? Or do you use those tools, and does the PM are they able to do that work? And again, can they do that work at the fraction of the time it took them before? So you're seeing that trend happening over and over again. And so that is what I call the super IC, where across all the different functions, again, you don't need a research manager with a team of 4 researchers. You need a really, really super IC researcher who is then able to use all the tools and teach the entire organization to fish, right? You don't need a director of product with a team of 7 product managers. You need maybe one person who's really experienced, especially domain expertise these days is valued more so than anything else, because it's like that is hard to come by. But all the other things that are like the day-to-days of the PM job, there are tools to make your time more efficient and for you to do a lot more. So you need that one person to those like 3 people, as opposed to that one person to those like 7 or 8 people. So that's really what's happening when I think about career tracks, when I think about hiring, and the rise of the Super IC. And then finally, I do want to spend just a few moments. Like I spoke a lot about tools. And so this idea of really taking the time and energy to play with tools, right? To be like, if you're a PM and you're writing specs and you've literally, I mean, I hope this is nobody listening to this webinar, but like you've never used ChatGPT to help you do that, you know, you need to, right? Like, how do you make it so that you are doing the thinking work, you are doing the really difficult work, but you are letting the really manual things like tedious work fall away to the tools, to the products that are out there. And so I think that that extends all the way from like actually having things that write PRDs for you. Paulo just talked about some of the stuff that, that Reforge is doing with artifacts, and then being able to help you train and write a lot of things. Like that is really neat. That's something that's completely new. Before you had to, again, you're like, I'm writing a spec on payments. I don't know anything about payments. So then you're sitting there being like, okay, I need to go talk to my manager and I need to get them to spend time putting me in touch with mentors or other people or experts in the space. And today, with again, just kind of with the resources that are abundant out there, you're able to use tools like what Paula mentioned to be like, what are the artifacts that people have created for the payment space? Let me pull those and let me see if that can help me figure out what it is that I'm trying to do, and bring that expertise like into like the thinking and writing that I'm doing. So shifting the tedious work into tooling and actually focusing your time on creatively thinking about the problem space, and then actually being able to get a lot more data than you were ever able to get before because of the tools I mentioned earlier. So that is definitely something that is just happening across the board, where a lot of the PM role is communication, but there's so many ways to make communication so much faster. Whether it's a loom, because you're just, you talk a lot faster than you're able to type. So you're like, I will use a loom and do asynchronous sharing, or it is a, PRD generator that you tweak, or it is, something that pulls in artifacts across that specific kind of like problem space that you're dealing with. Those are all ways to really supercharge your productivity. And that is actually related to this concept of the Super IC. And it's also related to the concept of why, in many ways that PM manager role is really taking more of the true player coach with an emphasis on player instead of just coach. And so that's kind of the thing I want to cover in terms of just the trends I'm seeing. I am going to just spend 2 minutes on kind of the course, which I'm really excited about. For me, being able to actually spend time with a very intimate cohort of people. So I run this course about twice a year, and the cohort size is capped, and it's really small. It's about 50 people. So it's very different from the other courses out there where you're, one person out of 200 and you get dumped into a huge community. Really being able to spend time together. I look at every single application, and we ask you like what it is you're trying to accomplish. We match you with a group of people. I think very highly of having accountability buddies, right? And so being able to like be in that cohort, be with another group of people who are dealing with the same problem. You could be someone looking for a new job, and you're like, I want to have an intimate cohort to go work on that problem with. Or you might be someone who's like, hey, I'm actually trying to figure out this exact problem. I'm an IC. I've been a PM for a very long time. I've always thought that I would manage next, but what does management look like today? And what does management look like at my company? So again, we debug some of these problems. And then specifically, it's over 3 kind of big chunks. The first one is actually just deeply thinking about your career. It's, we'll give you frameworks. I give you frameworks about how you think about kind of your career at large. But at the end of the day, like your career is a very personal thing. And I can't stress that enough. I think we live in a world where, you kind of look at the internet, you look at social media, and you're like, so-and-so is doing this and so-and-so is doing that. And therefore that's the thing to do. I just want to remind everyone that like careers are incredibly personal. Like what actually gives you energy is something I really encourage all of us to think about and figure out, because when we are doing the thing that gives us the most energy, that's when we're really able to shine and accelerate and do a great job. We talk a little bit about, actually, we spend a good chunk talking about like, what does it mean to be good? Because I think it's kind of a misnomer for people, or it's kind of backwards for people to be like, oh, I want to think about my career, but you don't actually know what being a great PM is. And given that I teach essentially like product management foundations, really distilling the essence of that and talking about like, what does being good at your job means? Like that is the first thing you got to nail before you even think about, okay, what does that mean for my career? What does it mean for what I get to do next? And then really thinking about that right role, whether you're at a company already or you are in the midst of a job search, how do you go make that short list of companies? And then how do you go and network your way into those roles? Because I think, I think all of us are aware that there are a lot of applicants these days. There are fewer jobs. And when you submit something on an online portal, it is a black box. Like the chances of anyone getting back to you, of you making it through the process is really, really low. So how do you actually manifest your own luck? How do you get that warm intro, even if you don't have that first degree connection or even secondary connection? And then really thinking about like that compensation package. Like so much of your career is being able to make the right bets, having financial security so that you can take riskier and riskier bets and like continuously move towards the things that give you energy as opposed to feeling like this is my job. And so really thinking about like, how does equity work across all of these different types of companies, from a startup all the way to a FANG company? What does equity look like? What's the risk appetite that you should be thinking about? And again, this is so personal at any given point in time. And so all of this starts with a career odyssey that we do together, where you're really reflecting on your own journey. Because again, to the things I mentioned at the very beginning, some people are like, this is a great thing that, in many ways, the manager role is collapsing, and it is the rise of the super IC, and it is the rise of the player coach. Like for a lot of people, that's very empowering. They're like, I've always felt like I want to continue doing IC work, but I feel the push to do management because that feels like the next step. For those people, it's actually like, this is great. The way the industry is moving is aligned to how I thrive. But then there are other people who are like, I actually don't like that for what, for whatever reason. They're like, maybe I really enjoy the coaching element so much that I'm sad that it's, instead of it being 70% or 80, 90% of my role, it's gonna be 30% of my role, right? So I think like really understanding yourself, what gets you excited, and then matching that to where the industry is going. And then, okay, given that intersection, what do I do next? That's a lot of how we think about this course. And then finally, just like the tactical nitty gritty of like, how do you take your company's career ladder? How do you think about doing great work, but then also being your best advocate? So that's in a nutshell how I think about this course. It's highly personalized, it's really intimate, and we are able to actually go through some of the things I talked about today at a high level in a lot more detail. And so again, I promise that I keep the me talking to all of you section really light and do a lot more Q&A. And so would love to go into that piece, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jay-Z. So we've got a few questions here already, and more coming in. So let's start off with this question from Mehdi, which is kind of a double click on what you mentioned about the player coach model and what that looks like with the evolution of PMs. So as a senior product leader, how do you deal with these super ICs? What is your role in leading these people when you need to balance your role in helping teams be effective? And Mehdi suspects that there's a potentially larger role now for leaders to coach and provide quality control around outputs. So yeah, how do you deal with these super ICs?
Yes. So I actually think that this was an issue before, in that a lot of people would, like, they viewed their role as like, I'm just passing information back and forth. Like, here's what I'm getting from the leadership team, and I'm going to pass that information down to my team. And so when I say that there's a rise of the super IC, I mean that there's much more of an emphasis to actually going deep and understanding the work yourself. And that's at all levels, in the sense that, I think that even at the CPO level, what I'm really seeing is, hey, how do we make sure that the CPO isn't just like, oh, here's my portfolio, I'm going to hire, again, very expensive, very senior people to just like run parts of my portfolio. I think there's a growing trend towards this expectation of like, hey, I want the CPO, I want the CTO to be able to drill really deep down. Not that they need to be at that 30-foot view at all times, but I think there's a growing expectation from founders, from kind of everyone, that like they're able to go down to that level more and more. So I think that's I just want to say like that is a trend that is happening. Then this idea of like, how does that player like what is that player coach role? What is the new kind of group PM or director of PM role? I think it's exactly that. I see a lot of people saying, hey, instead of us adding just another headcount, I am going to either so I think you're seeing a few things happen. Cases before where you're like, hey, I'm starting a new area and I'm going to allocate 4 headcount, a manager and 3 ICs. I'm actually going to only allocate 1. And I'm going to actually create a model where like that person needs to go unlock additional headcount. And so in that world, you're essentially hiring a senior person. And the first thing they are doing is IC work because they are going deep, like I mentioned before, getting down to like the nitty gritty. And then they're being very hands on. And then they're getting the product to a point where it has earned the right to go get more staffing. And so I see that shifting a lot more. Again, just the way the environment, the macroeconomic environment is going, the way headcount typically happens at these companies, it's shifting. I think in the past it was very much the team used to be X. Let's add 30%. Let's add 50%. Let's make it 2X. Like I saw that a lot over the past 10 years. And today I see a thing, which I call like zero-based budgeting, where actually when you do annual planning, instead of being, the new headcount is a percentage increase of the previous year's headcount, you're saying, I'm going to zero it all out. And actually I think that's a great practice. I do this with my teams. I do this with my companies, which is essentially, hey, cool, we hired a lot of people, but next year might be different. And in that world, let's start from a world where we don't have to assume that it is what we have today. Not that we're gonna, again, lay anyone off, but it's just like, let's build up the plan from the ground up. And then what probably we should do is shift people who are working on this area to a whole new area of investment that we haven't thought of before, as opposed to just being like, this is what typically finance does. They're like, okay, you've got a budget of this much. I'm either going to cut or I'm going to increase. And then everyone gets their respective cuts and increases. But you could be in a world where it's like, actually, I don't need any recruiters next year because we're not going to grow the headcount, but I really need ML engineers. Right. So doing that zero-based budgeting allows you to not just take every function and add or subtract X%, but to be like, given what I need to do now, what does that bet look like? So zero-based budgeting. And then, sorry, lastly, going back to player coach, how do you do that really well? The reality is, I think the first mindset shift I want to kind of communicate to all of you is it's okay to be going into the 30-foot details. Like I think there are some people who are like, this feels like a career step back for me to be icing again, or for me to be like so in the weeds. And it's like, no, I actually think that you will be able to build a better team when you really deeply understand the problem. And again, this is by no means that you're supposed to be staying at that 30-foot view, but if you cannot, at least for a week, go deep, really understand what's happening, it's very difficult for you to advocate for your product or for your team. Like, how do you know exactly what the issue is? Is it that you need to double the headcount, or is it that you're actually missing a back-end engineer? It's like something very specific. So you don't need double the engineering team. You just need a better back-end engineer to make this whole thing work, right? So it's like getting people to feel very comfortable diving down to that 30-foot view and saying, I'm going to get my hands dirty. I'm going to figure out what's actually going on, and I'm going to do the job that I'm going to then later hire for. That is the mindset shift that, first of all, I really believe in. I think it's going to build better, stronger, more resilient, more efficient teams. And I think what I really want to impart on all of you, especially if you're thinking about that, like your career progression, is to not feel like it's a step back to be doing that, because it's actually a way better way to figure out what the problems are, which is essentially your job as a PM, and then figure out how to solve them, whether it's, again, through product changes or organizational changes.
So you mentioned and talked about, say, PM leaders going down to the 30-foot level. This next question is almost thinking about the opposite trend, which is, do you think AI is giving PMs room to focus more on product strategy and product vision as well as being a super IC?
Yes, it's actually both, which is this really beautiful, I don't even call it tension. It's really this beautiful push and pull, which I think gives people a lot of leverage. But at the same time, it's like, if you don't understand what it is you are really trying to do, how are you going to ask someone who's not even human? Basically, how are you going to ask machines to go do the thing, right? If you're like, so now it's like, it's all the more important to really understand what are your constraints? What's the problem you're solving for? Who are my users and what do they want? How do you take all the human, creative deep thinking parts of the work and do that, and then be like, oh, well, this thing that used to take me 10 hours because I was like slowly writing this doc. I'm not a great writer. And I just had like, maybe English is not my first language, right? So you're like, oh, this like took me so long. That work can all be highly leveraged and in many ways outsourced when you can keep the work of like, okay, I need to deeply understand the problem. So it is this combination of like, you got to quickly zoom down into the details, really understand it. And then your job, you should think to yourself, okay, now that I've zoomed in, my whole job is to zoom back out. And I think this is another thing that's happening in budgeting, but also when it comes to, your team and your day-to-day. What is a thing that has to be done by a human versus what is a thing that I could use tooling for? That is like that question really, like it sort of happened when you did annual planning. You're like, oh, of course, like I can use a vendor or not. But I think today there's like every function, whether you're the CPO or the CRO or the CFO, you're thinking about this idea of like, hey, should I actually just replace the things I would have budgeted actual headcount towards with tooling? And so that is like, if you take that trend and you apply it to your day to day, it's that exact thing. Hey, I've gone really deep. I really understand the problem. I really understand what's going on. I did the actual work myself. I didn't just delegate it out. But now, can I delegate pieces of it, or not even delegate? Can I automate pieces of it because I deeply understand how to do the thing?
So this next question from Hal is related. So let's say you've thought about this, you've realized that you can automate some things, but you still do need to build a team and actually do need to hire. So when hiring, does the potential for super ICs change how you're evaluating PM candidates?
Yes. I am seeing a world where I've always done this throughout my career, but I'm seeing it actually more prevalent. I really love converting people into the PM role that have a lot of context on our business or on our product slash users. And so I've converted people from the support role into a PM role because they just have such deep context. I've converted people from design, data, even engineering, right? Like it's like they understand something super well so that if you give them the PM skill set, which I think is a lot more teachable these days, there are a lot more resources and a lot of things can be automated. Those generic things can go away and fade into the background. And so it's ever more important to understand your product and your users and to have like that deep passion that is like hard to like teach, right? Like if someone is working in support and deeply listening to everyone's problems for 3 years, like you can't replicate that easily with someone off the street. And so I've always done this. I've converted a lot of people. I've kind of like graduated them up into the PM role. I'm a big believer of that. And I think that is going to happen more and more because of a few things. One, again, the barrier to entry is lower because the like maybe you're at a small company, their customer support person, and you're like, okay, before I had to go through a whole thing. I had to literally figure out how to get a role, maybe get trained. And today you're like, I have all these resources, right? So I can go out there, I can get help writing my spec. I can look at a bunch of artifacts online. I just learn, I can learn and learn. And so then you're able to almost like supplement the things that would have taken a lot of time from a manager in the past, learn from it, and then show up with like, here's my body of knowledge about the product, about our users. I've just supplemented it with a lot of like outside learning. And so the ability for someone like that to be effective in the PM role, I feel like that barrier is getting lower and lower. And as a product leader, you have that trend. And then simultaneously, you have the trend where you're like, hey, again, like going out and hiring from scratch is very costly. It's not just about the headcount, it's about the fact that I need to have a recruiting team, right? Like you're like, there's a lot of things that need to happen. And in an environment where, less is more, it becomes harder and harder to go out there and justify hiring that person. Again, what I'm seeing is a trend where it's like, we just don't have that expertise in house. We do not have the payments expertise. We do not have the ML expertise. We do not have X expertise. And you're going out to market and you're getting that role. But for everything else, where you're like, hey, I need to hire core PM. Do I go out and hire someone or to actually give someone a chance who's sitting at this company who deeply understands our user, our problem space, and our business? This is when I see that happening more and more often.
We've got a related question here about this industry expertise. Could you actually elaborate more on this preference for specific industry expertise? Because there's often an assumption that PM skills are transferable across industries. So why is this trend occurring?
Yeah. In many ways, I just want to first say, like, I do believe that a lot of a lot of the skills are transferable because at the heart of it, the PM job is truly, can I learn quickly? Am I able to really think from first principles? And am I a good communicator? That's at the heart of the PM role. I just really want to say, like, that's what I deeply believe in. That being said, you then take off your personal belief hat and you put on your industry hat, and like the trend, right? And I think there is a world where in many ways, again, this is a little bit of an overstatement, but I'm using this hyperbole just so people can kind of like internalize this. In some ways we can say like we're in an arms race right now where like companies are like, oh, I'm falling behind, I'm not doing enough AI stuff, what's going on? Like there's almost this FOMO that is happening right now. And so when companies are feeling FOMO and at the same time they're feeling high pressure from this is what your new business profile needs to look like. This is what your new, like, this is what good looks like. This is what healthy looks like. When you're feeling both of those pressures, you can just naturally see why companies and hiring managers are doing this thing where they're like, "Oh, I need to conserve, and in what I have, like, to go out and go do something with, I'm going to do whatever I can to alleviate my FOMO." That is what's happening. I'm not saying that it is, the best thing for every company. In fact, there are many negative consequences, terrible consequences for not just like, there are consequences for all of us as product people, but that is just the kind of like the environment that we live in today. And so I think it's first important to just acknowledge that and then to be like, okay, well, in that situation, what do I do given my skill sets? And again, I think it's a lot easier to kind of go through that in more depth as part of the course and part of the cohort because there's so much generalizations and there's so much nuance based on every person's background that I don't want to say a thing and have it like apply to some people and not to others.
So putting on that hat, thinking to myself, what do I do in this role as a PM now? This person asks a question about tooling. So we have a bunch of new AI tools that allow PMs to do things like writing spec code or um, doing mockups in Figma. How do you recommend PMs navigate cross-functional collaboration without devs or designers feeling like their roles or autonomy are being encroached upon by the PM?
Yeah. Well, I first want to say that if you are in a situation where you have people who are feeling like you're stepping in on your, if you're in a situation where people feel like you're stepping on their toes, you are in a better situation than a lot of the world who are PMing because for those people, they're like, I wish I had a designer. I wish I had an engineering lead, tech lead, so on and so forth. So I would first start with like for a large group of people, it's, run towards the tooling because you most likely don't have those partners, don't have those resources, and you're trying to do, again, you're trying to do more with less, right? In a world where you're like, I actually am part of a trifecta, or I have these roles defined. I really, again, want to go back to like principles of what good PM looks like. You are never trying to do things that someone else can do. Because by definition, like you're not responsible for doing anything. You're responsible for the outcome. So if you're able to have other people do all the things and you can go do higher leverage things or something else to ensure that the team is successful, that is always the right answer, right? So I want to start with this idea of like, if your designer is like, this is how I want to work, and or if your designer is like, this is what I want to do, in general the principle I have is like, great, let them do their thing. Then it's the collaboration of like, okay, well, what if my designer is using a tool that's actually not that great, and it's adding it's like making us feel very, very waterfall as opposed to super fast, agile, iterative. That's where I think it's, again, the core of a PM job is that partnerships, that EQ, that communication skills. So like, how do you, go look for the tools, and introduce them to your teammates? Or how do you evaluate the tools that your team is using? How do you get more out of them? Like those are all the things I think about if you're actually in the bucket of people who have the leads. And I think like finally, I think maybe the heart of the question is like almost like an EQ relationship building question. Like how do you do that effectively? At the end of the day, people, they all have goals. And if you can help them achieve their goals, they will be happy. Like that, again, it's like part of the PM job, right? You're like, everyone has goals. And as a team, we have a goal. How do I help everyone achieve their goals? And so I think my advice there is, how do you really deeply understand your specific designer? What are their pain points today? Treat them like you treat a user of your product, right? Like, what are the things that they hate? They might actually really hate mocking up things and making them pixel perfect to give to engineering. And they're like, I just wish engineering would look at my rough Figma and use dev mode and use a bunch of stuff, and boom, like I don't need to do all of the extra work to make this thing deliver to dev. That might be their pain point. And that's a very easy way to be like, great, let's talk about tools. Let's talk about how to like make your time more effective, right? Because, and I really have never seen anyone be like, I'm doing this thing, it's taking up a lot of time. I can't wait to continue doing it. I think in general, people are very receptive to like, hey, this thing is taking up a lot of your time. I just found you a solution that made it so much faster.
Continuing on this trend of just how these trends are happening quickly in the PM world, are there implications for those people that are looking for a PM job or looking to break into a PM role? Is there a change in the skill set that is higher or lower in demand?
Yeah. I through folks who've attended this course in the past, and also just people I coach and mentor, I definitely see something I've had to work with a few people on is kind of this reluctance to do what they think of as a step back. They're like, hey, I've gotten this far in my career. The next step is naturally a director title or a um, people manager role. Like, I think there's a lot of people that really get stuck on whether it's title or it's on just like what they determine as scope, and specifically scope meaning I'm managing or I'm not. And what I really, again, the core tenet of what I would be sharing in the PM career course is, at the end of the day, the thing that matters most is company growth. And as a result of company growth, the network that you're a part of. In that list, at the very bottom is going to be your title, and it's going to be your quote unquote scope at which you take the offer. And what I mean by that is, again, there's so many people who are like, I'm not even going to entertain interviewing for this job because it's not a manager role. And I believe that at this point in my career, like I should be managing, right? Or I'm not going to take this offer because like I only have 2 PMs reporting to me, and I previously had 10. And I think that what I really encourage people to do is, that's not what's actually important in the long run, even the medium run, right? Like, instead, if you optimize for company growth, you're like, I see something in this company, I see a lot of potential, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to extract that potential, make it real. That is the best career accelerant, because first of all, if you really pick the right company, the size of the role today versus 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, so on and so forth, like that's going to look radically different. That means you picked the right company. You will have picked the wrong company if the role is essentially this, like the wrong company is going to only have so much growth because the company's not growing. And so a lot of times people are like, I'm really focused on my title, my scope of when I take the job. And what I say is, it's not about that. It's about when you, like, what you think will happen 18 months from now. Right. And so there's totally a situation where it's actually probably much better to go to a company, you're an IC, you're stripped, whatever the term, like, because I think if there's a negative connotation, where I really don't think it's that bad, like of your previous titles or whatever, and you're just going in, you're like, I'm a PM, but I'm working on the most important thing for a company that I really believe in, for a product that I really believe in. I think there's a lot of space for upside. That is what I would really look for when you're looking for a job, as opposed to, I gotta be a manager, I gotta keep my director title, I keep my PM manager level, whatever. That just doesn't matter.
So what it sounds like you're touching on really is about impact and what impact you can impart. And so this next question is about career ladders and impact. Have you seen a great example of what a collapsed PM career ladder looks like when it has done a great job articulating the impact of Super ICs?
Yeah. I do this with my team. I don't think that many people do. But I really like doing this, which is, I have a career ladder, like, of course, but I actually my emphasis is less about the career ladder, but it's more about how any person at any level on my team takes a career ladder and actually says, this is what great looks like. Because I think that the thing I really want to stress is that, first of all, the PM role is one of those things. I say this to my Stanford class all the time. People come in just like they're Stanford students, right? So they come in, they're like, I'm used to doing problem sets. I'm used to like having a black and white, this is good and this is bad. And I'm like, that is the opposite of the PM role. There's no, like, other than the outcome that you drive, which of course is going to have like a number, like a business metric to it, or at the very at least it's like an input to an output, right? Like an input metric to a business output metric. Like, other than that, everything else is gray. Like what you do in 24 hours, like, I mentioned before, like what's your role versus your designer's role, how you influence, how do you get the outcome? All of that is great, which is, I think, super exciting because you can innovate, you can do a lot of different things. But for some people, that's really scary because you're like, there's no black and white answer. And I say this all the time, like, as an engineer, you can have built the thing, and there's an objective way to measure your all that's also with an asterisk, but like generally more objective way to measure your efficiency, your output. And you can build the completely wrong thing and you can still get promoted. You can, that happens. That cannot happen in PM. Like if you build the wrong thing, if you don't drive the outcome, you didn't do a good job. Right. And so I think that I wanted to start with these concepts because at the end of the day, like that is the heart of PMing. And so at like what I really think about is like, have you defined what success looks like? And going back to the career ladder, I want people on my team, and I highly encourage you, and this is again also something we talk about in like the third module of the course. You take your company career ladder and you write out what success looks like. That is a huge part of the job. You bringing ambiguity you bring clarity to ambiguity. So the ambiguity is like, what does that mean for my career? You should be the one holding the pen. You should be the one writing that out. Hey, I would like to do these things. This is what my career ladder generally says I should do. But what does that really mean for my area? And again, the reality of this is why I like gave the example of like the PM role is really ambiguous. The reality of like success for a growth PM versus success for a platform PM versus success for a 0 to 1 PM, completely different. Right. And like one is incredibly measurable by numbers. That's the growth PM. The platform PM, good luck like measuring that by numbers. It's hard. The 0 to 1 PM, again, like what numbers even matter? Like you might think that this number matters in like this phase of development, and then you realize you completely did it wrong. So like it doesn't matter anymore. So I think that there are just things about the PM role that are very ambiguous. And what I'd encourage you to do is to bring clarity to ambiguity, because that is your job. That's literally your job. You should thrive in the idea of like, I'm in chaos and it's my job to go bring some clarity, even if it's not perfect. Those are the best PMs. And so then I would encourage you to do that same thing and bring that same mindset to the way you think about your career and the way you like take your career ladder and bring it to life, and then have that conversation with your manager.
Okay, we're right at time. Do you have time for one more last question?
Let's do it.
What tools do you currently use?
I use obviously ChatGPT. We've actually created an instance of it for our team, which is like Linktree brand and voice. So we use a lot of that. I do use Sauce, which is something I mentioned. So you kind of like can pull insights across all of your different channels. I use a tool called Adora, which essentially helps me. The growth team is changing things all the time. It helps us. This is the whole like 30-foot view. Like everyone should be able to like quickly look at something and be like, what's going on? What's changing? It's not like only the PM in the specific area knows, and like their manager doesn't know, and God help me, I don't know. Like being able to like see all of those visuals. Like, so I use that. I use Figma, obviously. We are a heavy user of Notion here at Linktree. And then I use Linktree. I use Linktree so that, like as things happen, as I'm doing things, I can put it all in my Linktree and have all of my digital identity be in one place.
Awesome. Well, Jay-Z, thank you so much for walking us through these trends in the PM world. And thank you for sharing all your insight during the Q&A.